So let's start by looking at the big picture. How algorithmic bias continues to shape our lives globally. So when coded bias premiered, it exposed how systems meant to recognize faces were instead erasing them. And since then, AI has gone mainstream. As you're seeing, it's making hiring decisions. It is grading our scores. It's even predicting who might get a loan. And in other parts of the world, who'll get stopped by police. God forbid that the Kenyan police force gets access to this. Dr. Joy, since the film's release, what's changed? Do you feel like the world is moving closer to accountability, or are we just getting better at masking bias under the banner of innovation?
Such a great question. Before I get to your question, I just want to express how excited I am to be in Nairobi. This is my first time in Kenya, and we've been so well greeted and hosted. So thank you all for making time to come. Now to accountability. Are we doing
Or lack thereof?
one thing since the film came out, every time I see it or we screen it, it feels like it could have come out yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. The topics are so relevant. And I think since the film came out, because AI has been increasingly adopted, more people now understand, right? Or starting to have a better understanding of the impact and implications. So we've had a mixed bag overall. I think we saw probably in 2019, 2020, there was this recognition, particularly for facial recognition technologies, that due to inaccuracies, at the very least, it probably shouldn't be used, but also some of those civil rights implications as well. I do think we're in another moment now, especially with the introduction of generative AI systems and the billions of dollars of investment in some of the leading AI companies, where people are not pausing, right, to think about what could go wrong. And so you very much have this race for supremacy, paste and paste control, altering deletion. The fate of AI remains uncompleted, right? And so when it comes to accountability, we have seen progress. And I think it's important to acknowledge things like the EU AI Act or other types of legislation that has been passed, but also companies that have decided not to release certain types of AI systems. So I do think it's a varied landscape, but we certainly need more accountability.
And it's interesting the point you just brought up. I know we're going to talk a little bit about policy and the race that is going on and what feels like a tension between regulation versus leaving space for innovation. And I'm looking forward to that space. Maurice, you spend a lot of time with innovators building new products and tools. Do you see African technologists learning from these global lessons, or are we at risk of replicating the same patterns of exclusion within our own systems?
I think we still do have we could still make the same mistakes. In this case, not like, let's say, gendered or racial biases, but also, like people with disability, people who are in different social economic class. So I see that being replicated because there's something that somebody said, like, the builder of the technology they're human, they have their own biases. I think the only thing I would quote is, I think it was Toni Morrison who said something about, now that you know better, do better, or something like that. Now that you know that there's biases in terms of how we code and add it into, like, our biases added into the code, then how do we recognize that? I'd like to give a simple example that is closer home. We all know that the current regime tried to kind of use AI in terms of how to allocate school fees to kids who are going to government schools. And you saw how that was completely biased. And I'm not sure if they are continuing with it, but it was something that was completely messed up in terms of the biases, because they're looking at your social economic class, where you come from, your parents, what do they do, and all that. But you find some of these guys are orphans who are being taken care of by guardians. That's not their real parents per se, but then you are allocating them as if their parents are like rich, something like that. So I think, we still do face, in short, we do still face a challenge of biases creeping in if we're not careful.
There's still a lot more work to be done. One theme that also came out in the documentary was, the fact that algorithmic bias doesn't stop at national borders, right? A lot of the tools that we're even using locally have been built by some of these large tech companies, and they're being deployed here often, if not always, without context taken into account. So, Melissa, this one is for you. What would a truly global and just framework for accountability look like? Is that even a thing that we should aspire to?
Wow. I think we need to ask ourselves, do we have real global frameworks for regulating emerging technology? Because when you say the word global, what connotation does that have? It usually means looking towards the West, looking towards the global North to tell us what the standards are. It's very rare to have African voices, leave alone Kenyan voices, in there also contributing to what global is. So I would say, even without talking about local context, just global does not even, Africa does not feature in what global is defined as, right? So yes, when we talk about global systems, I think we need to, I don't ascribe to global things. I'm sorry. That's why at CIPIT, when we look at AI, we talk about African AI. I say the global north is well covered. They can handle themselves. But in Africa, what are we doing about African AI? When AI comes to us, because we are majority consumers, what are the systems that we have in place? What policies, what regulations do we have in place? Only recently have we been starting to work on regulations and policies around AI. And even in the policy-making process, I can tell you it's difficult to have the African context included there. People will start telling you, oh, we should not reinvent the wheel. Let's do what has already been done by others. But others don't understand our context. Maurice has just talked about the means testing as an example. You can't get an algorithm and apply it in Kenya and have it make sense. It doesn't make sense. We need to think about our local context, yes. We need to also think about the talent and capacity for people to evaluate algorithms to understand local context or to test if it will make sense in the local context. So what am I saying? We need to test these things as they're crossing into our borders. And maybe we need to think about sandboxes, and I hate them. I hate regulatory sandboxes, but I think in the instance of artificial intelligence, we have to think about regulatory sandboxes because that really brings out our local context. It brings out our regulators who hopefully have an understanding, but we just can't copy paste. In Kenya, we love to copy paste. And also think about certain developers who can be, or innovators who can be part of that sandbox, certain users who can be introduced in that sandbox to really ensure that we are getting a real sense of how this will affect us. So I don't know if I've answered your question or if I've just gone ahead to say that I don't believe in the word global.
That could spark an entirely different conversation. But yes, you've answered it. I think what I'll do is...
Even on that point, I remember serving on the EU Global Tech panel. Tunisia was representing Africa. I pointed that out, but they were doing better on gender diversity, which they pointed out to me. And I mean, I was glad I was on that panel. We spoke to EU defense ministers, in fact, about why if you use computer vision with facial recognition, the people trying to sell this to you might not necessarily let you know what the limitations are. But, we see this all over the world when we are in so-called global settings, what that may or may not mean. So I'm so glad you brought up that point on global.
Maurice, anything you want to add? You're good. Okay. Okay. There's a budding theme that's popping up here, which is actually moving us neatly into the next theme of our conversation, which is how policy and regulation are or are not catching up. So I'm going to start again with you, Melissa. So what does meaningful governance look like in the African context? And I'm sure you're happy that I said African context and not global.
What about global south? What do you think of that terminology?
Even that feels problematic.
No, thank you. Even Africa can be problematic, right? Because if you think about who represents Africa, you'll find mostly people talk about Tunisia, South Africa, Egypt. And gender comes into the conversation as to who who speaks for Africans? And I think that's a good thing to ask ourselves, right? At CIPIT, we're meant to sort of help people think about policy questions that would lead to actual policies and regulations. And we have to start by first identifying what type of AI is happening here. Yes, facial recognition is happening because other people are bringing it onto us. And do we think about localizing it or understanding the context? For me, in fact, I was having a conversation earlier with Martin, and I warned him that I'd point at him. Things like fintech make sense, right, in the African context as to where is AI going to be used that will make sense for Africans in the majority. Fintech would be a good example. So those in the fintech space, when they're thinking about utilizing artificial intelligence, for example, for determining loans, or other issues around credit, where is their North Star? That's the question that I usually have for them. Many of them are looking at the AU continental AI strategy, which also was a very political process. Apparently there were two. Don't know which one is the right one.
Model there.
Yeah, there's that, right? So essentially, I think we have to first start with what are we using it for in order to understand how to build good regulations around it. We have to think about users first. Users normally are not mapped as major stakeholders. We also have to think about what role are we wanting to play in that ecosystem. There's also bias that exists that is external from the bias that's from the global north, right? The gender issue, the language issue, right? Some of these we're not tackling, I think, robustly enough. So we need to think of how do we infuse our own understanding in this ecosystem in order to make it responsible, ethical, right? And just. And then let's also define those terms for ourselves. What responsible would mean in an African context, right? Because something that's fair in the North might not be fair here. Something that's fair in South Africa might not be fair here based on the culture. I really don't feel like I'm answering your questions. I feel like I'm just talking, but I hope that this sort of indicating.
No, it is. And even before I move on to the next question, there's even in your explanation around how, we're not focusing on some of the, like the gender gap, we're not focusing on the language bit. I think the theme that's popping up there is that we seem, at least the innovation seems to be moving faster than policy and governance can. So then how do we navigate that challenge?
I think we have to be comfortable with the fact that innovation will always move faster than regulation.
Okay.
That is a fact that we have to be comfortable with. And essentially, if we accept that, then we can work with innovators in terms of creating regulations, policies that help them to continue to innovate, but also are not being harmful to others. It's finding that balance. Finding that balance is not easy. Innovators don't want to talk to regulators. They hear the word regulation and they start being up in arms saying, you're stifling us, you're hindering us. That's when they'll give you all the list of the things that they're suffering from: power, lack of access to compute, all those things that they're dealing with. And then now you want to add another barrier. So I've learned that I need to speak to innovators by telling them, okay, you've told me your challenges. How do we help you innovate while also ensuring that your customers or the citizens are not harmed by this process? Sort of asking them to flip a switch in their thinking. That's where regulatory sandboxes come in. And even though I don't like that, it makes sense. It allows them to innovate, but in a safe space, right? Where regulators are involved, but they're not involved to stifle. They're involved to sort of say, okay, let's see, when you do this, what happens? Do we have a system that can match this harm? Or do we now need to think about another regulation, another policy that can help with this harm? And innovators tend to see in live action the harms that they would cause. Okay. The caveat that I have is regulatory sandboxes are really for evolved environments. People like Kenya, South Africa can do regulatory sandboxes. Imagine doing a regulatory sandbox in Congo. And we have to be cognizant that AI is used in Congo. So what do we do? What do we do about that? So we can't say it's the answer to everything. So there's no one size fits all regulation or regulation solution. It must always flow with context. Okay. In the Kenyan context, it makes sense. We did it with M-Pesa. Let's not talk about M-Pesa, but we did have a regulatory sandbox for M-Pesa, and that's how we got to where we are with it. We can do that for emerging technologies, not just AI, because something else might pop up after AI. So I'll say another thing that I hate saying, but also makes sense, is we need to have broad-based principles around how we will deal with emerging tech as well, so that we can be flexible or agile as people are innovating to ensure that the broad-based principles are being implemented. But please, let's not copy-paste principles from the North or the West or wherever. Let's come up with let's start from the users and the innovators up to figure out what those principles would be.
Actually, I have a question for. Sorry, I have a question for AJL.
Okay, we switching moderators. I just first defer to Angie if she's okay with this.
That's just
Proceed.
All right, we have your blessing.
so it's a panel coup. I've taken over.
So what happens when you bring your friends onto panel?
What I just wanted to ask is just in line to that question. How long did it take you to kind of get even to in front of Congress and kind of talk about it? And I think the last statement that I saw was that Amazon was paused there. It subsequently paused that.
Yeah.
And for me, that is almost like success on how policy is catching up with innovation.
Yeah.
So just how long did that take? Because in Kenya,
Yeah.
takes long.
Got it. I think what's interesting about the journey we see in Coded Bias is at the end of the film, there still were no regulations in the US, federal regulation with facial recognition. Amazon stopped selling to law enforcement. So did IBM, so did Microsoft, all of the US-based companies that we audited because we were using other levers beyond policy. So at the time that I was testifying, I was more so fighting a narrative battle than a policy battle. So the scenes that you see, that's a stage, right? And that's a stage to offer a different vision and also articulate the harms that were happening. One of the scenes where you see Icy May watching me share their story and saying she wants to tell her mom, that's more what we were doing it for, to say, you are not alone in this. So how long did it take? We're still fighting for those regulations on the state side, but it also showed me that policy works in other types of ways. So you might not necessarily get a national law passed, but we saw quite a bit of success with state laws. We used to call San Francisco Ban Francisco because it was the first city in the world to ban police use of facial recognition technologies. And even now you have Amazon, they have this Ring doorbell that they are now introducing a familiar face feature. In states in the US like Texas and Illinois, there are actually laws that say you have to have consent before you take somebody's biometric data. So it's not released there. So I do think sometimes, of course, we want to see if we can push for something on the national level, but starting locally actually makes a difference. And it can be as local as your school, right? And saying, what is it that we're going to allow or not allow? And so maybe now you're more so convincing people in your community versus the broader government. So those are some lessons that I learned along the way. Also, tech hat, right? I'm a software engineer for a hair care tech company, ed tech. So I used to think policy didn't matter and laws didn't matter. I had no interest in testifying. I wanted to go code. I wanted to talk to people who actually, quote unquote, knew what they were talking about and all of that. And in this journey, right, as a student, I first start with a very technical lens when I'm looking at these technologies. I'm like, okay, let's look at the data sets. Let's test the AI systems. Let's do algorithmic audits. And as I was doing that, I was being introduced to organizations that were more policy focused. So even when you see me testifying, I was with the Georgetown Law Center on Technology and Policy. They had me do a moot hearing and told me how to address the people correctly, right? It's like, no, you say chairman, you say this from that and all of that. So it was a journey walking into, we need to use our full team, right? So some with the technical insight, and that's oftentimes what AJL is doing. We're providing research, empirical evidence that then people like the Brooklyn tenants can go use, or people can use it in congressional settings and policy settings. So that's our contribution to say, you may or may not agree. Here's what the data is showing when it comes to the bias piece, right? What are we going to do about it? So thinking about policy sometimes as what are the narratives we're changing? And I was coming in from an event called Vision and Justice, where you had Sherilyn Ifill, who used to be a chief counsel for the Legal Defense Fund with the NAACP. And so they are a historic organization fighting for civil rights in the United States. And she said, as a lawyer, oftentimes they've needed the artists and the storytellers, because even if you get laws to change, if you don't get attitudes to change, you haven't necessarily gone the full distance. So I think it's so important to say, oh, we all have different elements here that we bring.
I'm going to move us on to the next section just because you've had such a rich conversation on policy. And I think that one of the major themes that's coming out of that is that policy alone can't fix what's broken. It seems like we need to have a lot more collaboration, but then movements and communities are often the ones that will lead where the institutions might be lagging behind. So one of the things we are seeing across the world is that, these artists, these technologists who are coming together to challenge these bias systems. Hello, Dr. Joy, poet of code, to reclaim the data narrative. So Maurice, let me start with you. You've seen some incredible energy in the Kenya tech and creative communities. So how can that same creativity be used to make AI more inclusive and culturally grounded?
I think it's the recognition of what we just discussed in terms of for it to be more inclusive, then you need to do not include, I don't want to say users, or do not include the community that you want to serve as an afterthought. So almost including them from the product design level and figuring out what are some of the challenges that they might face that are nuanced, even as you are kind of creating and being able to kind of change as you get that feedback. That's the short answer. I don't want to go through the long one, which is more of how to do it.
I wanted the long answer.
You want the long answer?
Yeah.
I also have the long answer.
I wanted to give us a simple example of it's not within the creative space. The creative space, actually, we do face a very significant challenge with the use and adoption of AI as a tool, which could also be both sides. We've seen, from strikes in LA to here, people using it to cut their production time of podcasts from 40 minutes to 5 minutes. There's some good side of it, but where it is not inclusive in terms of how they create. Recently, I don't know how many of us are Kenyans in the room. Just asking, because this is an international audience, right? But also, how many?
But do you say?
How many of us have registered to vote? Right? So we have a voter registration process that is ongoing. Good. We have a voter registration process that is going on in Kenya, and for the first time, we're being asked for facial recognition. Yep. And for me, it is a question of one, what are you going to do with the data? Why? You already have my national ID number, you have my fingerprints, everything, but they're asking for facial recognition right now. And somebody made a bit of noise a little bit, then they made a statement, but did they include us as Kenyans to ask us and tell us? Hence, what that data could be used for could be very risky. So for me, that's one example of, if you don't include me, then I face the risk of being harmed later, and sometimes without even me knowing that I should be included,
Yeah, go ahead.
So I really want to talk about Noodle, the Noodle license.
Do you want to say,
Let me say.
give the full name and context for everybody in the room who doesn't know what the Noodle license is?
Okay, so Noodle is the Nolite Obodo Open Data License, which we developed with Professor Chijioke Okori from the University of Victoria and myself at CIPIT at Strathmore University. And how Noodle came about is really a story about including communities, right? So I had I do spend a lot of time with AI developers because I wanted to first map out what African AI is. And I found out that many AI developers are not building models, they're collecting data. And fine. And thank you, Joy. Oh my gosh, I need to tell you, thank you so much for saying data is destiny and not data is the new oil.
Thank you. Yes.
I was like, thank you so much. We are here. We understand each other. So I understand data is very important for artificial intelligence to function. They need data sets. They're trained with data sets, etc. And I understood that African data sets are low resourced. So we need to have people collecting the data to make them high resourced, especially language data for natural language processing. However, when you ask yourself who is making the decision about collecting language data on the continent, it is not Africans. It is the people who are funding AI. And in the documentary, we heard that it's usually big tech that's funding AI research, okay? So if you go and find out who's funding language data, you'll know which big tech. I don't want to mention them, but there's a particular big tech that's really pouring a lot of money in collecting data. So they're using African AI researchers to collect data sets, language data sets. Now, if you think about African languages, who speaks African languages?
Africans.
Okay, who speaks the Luo?
Blues.
So who in the majority of the Luos speak the Luo? Are they in Nairobi?
No.
So if you were to collect an experiment, if you were to collect your mother tongue, your native language, where would you go to?
To the village.
And that is literally what people were doing. They go to the village to collect African language data. Do they explain to these people what they are collecting the data for? Are they even compensating them? Some of them are, but the compensation is like $5 somewhere there. It's really ridiculous.
In comparison to how much the company that will benefit from the data will make
Exactly.
from the
Because
system.
why would big tech invest in collecting African language data sets if there is no profit at the end of it? So when I was talking to developers and discovering that they're collecting data sets, on top of that, the funding agreement would even prescribe how that data set would be shared. And it would say it would be shared under an open data license. Great, we love open data, right? But who has the ability to move a data set into a product right now? Is it going to be African AI developers? Okay, is it going to be African governments? Government is the number one user or first mover in terms of technology on the African continent. So if government is not going to use it, you've collected the data from the community, you've put it on Hugging Face or wherever as an open data set. Who is going to use it? So this is the question that African developers asked us, because some of them were being funded to scale, like collect data, create an innovation, an AI innovation, and then scale it for market. And then we have a meeting with them. We talk about, okay, so what is the biggest asset? My data set. Great. How have you shared your data set? As an open data license. How are you going to scale? Because you've given away your data to everybody. You cannot scale. And scaling is just one problem. There's problems of understanding local context. There's so many other questions. And that's how we ended up developing Noodle. But after developing Noodle, the story doesn't end there. It's not that we developed Noodle and we solved the problem. No. We had to go back to the community and ask the community, what license do you want? Or what benefit do you want? And going back to that community opened my eyes as to how these people are not involved in any shape or form other than it being extractivism. They were like, okay, so they have to start thinking of what makes sense for them. And after that, we did that with the Luo community, very much thanks to Maseno University and Dr. Lilian Wanzare. We went there, asked them, and we came up with benefits that they would want. Having conversations now with funders who are asking me, oh, you've made up this Noodle license. Great, let's talk about it. When a funder tells you that, it's not a good thing. And they said, well, this is so much work. Going to the community is so much work. You mean I have to go and ask them, why can't I just put an open data license on it and move? That is the real problem. That's the real scenario of inclusion, of the question of inclusion. It's the real scenario of how we are participating. And when I say we, not us, the elite privileged who understand, how we as Africans are participating.
And to that point, is it performative inclusion just to say we did it and now there's an open data set? Or is it power enabling inclusion for sure? And what you've described, there's a term for it called data laundering. So,
We're stealing that.
right? So you would normally, if you were a company with means, have to pay for that data. So instead, if you have researchers collect that data as an open license, and this is a known tech playbook, now you get the data for free, even though you have all of these resources. So hence this term data laundering.
And I guess I'd even use the word, like, I don't think I like the word inclusion anymore because, like you're saying, it feels performative. It's, you're ticking a checkbox to say, yeah, I did this, and so this means inclusion. But what we're really looking for is agency and ownership, right? And so that brings me to a question for you, Dr. Joy. When you look at the work you've been doing with your activism and artistry, how does that fit into storytelling and driving systemic change around AI injustice?
Yes, as I mentioned, I have a very technical background, so that's how I approached the work initially. But I realized that the research papers, even one of the most cited papers, right, in the field, is only going to reach so many people. So I had to go from the performance metrics of saying these are how various algorithms performed on different tests, different benchmarks, and so forth, to performance arts. Why do these numbers matter? Why do these differences, these disparities matter? And so that's what led to the poem AI, Ain't I a Woman? And I found in the halls of Congress, testifying and so forth, that it was often the art that opened people's eyes. And then we had the numbers to back it up as well. But when you see the face of somebody like Oprah Winfrey being misgendered by a company like Amazon, it makes you pause. Even the white mask that we see. Here I am at MIT. It's supposed to be this epicenter of innovation. And I'm literally coding in whiteface, putting on a mask to be rendered visible. And so those are the sorts of stories that I saw could do a different type of work than the research paper. And so my PhD actually ended up exploring both approaches, the artist and the scientist, the algorithmic audit paired with the evocative audit. What does it mean when you hear a line like, can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? And so that's where I realized that as much as I felt that I couldn't bring my art into the tech space, because I worked hard for my degrees to be doctor, and, showing that I can hang with everybody else. So I was like, maybe I'll leave this art part here. So they don't think the art is a gimmick or something else, but I actually found it to be one of the most powerful tools that we have, because at the end of the day, it's about our shared humanity. And that's what you're hearing when you hear the poetry, right? And then also seeing, I see that sometimes people whose lived experience isn't my lived experience, when they see a documentary like Coded Bias and they can see the Brooklyn tenants and you see her with her child and they just want to be able to move with agency and not feel like they're living under surveillance. The film is doing that storytelling work as well, which is very much humanizing what it means when we're talking about AI harm.
Thank you. And maybe just to all of you, are there any citizen-led or community movements that give you hope around this? Examples of how people are reclaiming their agency in the digital age. I know you have a couple. I mean, we saw them in the documentary. Are there any other examples from other parts of the world that give you hope?
Yeah, it's interesting because students give me hope. Oftentimes we'll see them take the work and then they'll say, oh, we don't want this certain technology being used in our school. I remember there was I guess she was 8 at the time. She's older now. Her name's Aurora. And she sent an email, or her mom sent an email to the Algorithmic Justice League. And she talked about how they had a class project where they were going to be a living wax museum. So they had to dress up as a historic figure. So she put on her red blazer. She got on her white glasses. She goes, I'm Dr. Joy, and I have a bunch of degrees. She listed them, and then she's like, I'm also pole vaulter. I was like, what? She did her homework, right? She did that kind of thing. But even the question she was asking, it was during an anniversary screening of Coded Bias, is making me think of some of the youth organizations like Encode Justice as well, where they're saying, we're the ones living in this, right? It's shaping our future. Here's our policy list of things we want addressed. And so I think when I see that youthful energy around it, it definitely continues to give me hope for sure.
Young people are the future. So Gen Zs, please go grab your voters cards. Please go vote. Anyway, thank you, Joy.
Public service announcement, and we interrupt this panel.
Melissa?
So yes, I know a bunch of communities. And I'll start with Deep Learning Indaba as a community in Africa that's doing a lot to build African data sets for Africans, to talk about models, to doing African research. Deep Learning Indaba. Also because through Deep Learning Indaba, I met Professor Vukosi Marivate, and Vukosi is the guy who pushed Chijioke and I to come up with the Noodle license. So Deep Learning Indaba always. I definitely also want to talk about the community that I've sort of built. These Dr. Lilian Wanzai, there's Leo Mutuku, there's Mark Irura Gashara, who we have been in the trenches of policy work in AI. Wow, we have been there. We have struggled. We used to be a larger group, but the groups sometimes don't survive the cause. That's normal, but they're out there doing their things. Like we can, they're definitely those people, and you as well, Angie. I mean, obviously. I want to also mention on a global level, the Creative Commons. I think Creative Commons is doing a lot of work in trying to understand the commons in terms of AI and really start shifting their vision from just the Western perspective to thinking as what are the licenses doing in the African context? They're asking the question. They may not have an answer. They're asking the question. That's a community that's also working. I want to specifically call out the Strathmore Law Review edition 10 class. I was on a panel with them 3 days ago. There was a paper that's titled The 30,000. And it's talking about the cultural artifacts that were moved from Kenya to Britain, while Kenya was a colony, and talking about cultural sovereignty and how cultural sovereignty should not be a negative concept. It should be viewed as part of identity, and really calling back our identity to us and rooting that in terms of thinking about emerging technologies. These are undergrad students. I was blown away. I cannot even say I was inspired. I was beyond inspired by the work that they're doing and the thoughts that they're having. And they even want to come up with an AI policy for their journal. It's a student-led journal. I was amazed. And yes, the kids are all right. The kids are doing great. So those are some of the communities I want to call out. And I know I'm being very fishbowl because I'm thinking about communities that I'm in. But let's not forget, I sometimes call myself a storyteller, but I'm realizing I have some way to grow. But I remember the protests last year on the finance bill. And did you see how the young people came together, were translating the bill and putting it online and trying to do civic education? The kids are all right. Those are the influencers. They're all right. And finally, I have to call her out, Mercy Mutemi, who's working with the data community in Kenya, the data annotators who have had a court case. Mercy's building a community where, well, there's already an association of the data annotators, just came out the other day, but she's doing the actual work of litigation, which litigation is not a joke. That's why I'm a researcher, not in courts. But I have to call her out. So yes. And if you notice, it's collective action, which is something that we have to do.
Thank you, Melissa. Maurice?
There's something that Dr. J had mentioned earlier about for us to change. It's not just one kind of like side approach. There's the policy work, but there's something you mentioned like twice, narratives. Also, narratives goes a long way to change how people view, use, and build AI tools. And for me, I mean, there's Matsakane from South Africa as a group that I've also followed. There's I think there's Lepa AI also who are doing some things around basically African languages. We have over 2,000 languages in Africa. So just trying and documenting most of that. So those are some of the committees that I've been following and looking at. Sadly, in terms of personalities within the industry where I am in, which is media and the creative space, globally, I mean, there's Willie who's talking about it a lot, the use of AI and all. I've not seen any local artists or creatives who are really championing either the rights, use, or creation of AI as a tool. I know of local media houses who are already using it, and are using it mostly to share very targeted information to you, right? So they're using it from a very commercial angle where they're saying, if you've talked about climate change, then read this article that we had 6 years ago on climate change. So they're using it from a very commercial angle. I don't think they've looked at the risks of it. Yeah. So those are some of the committees that I know, the two. Yeah.
I mean, on that point around the creatives, I wonder whether there's a challenge there in terms of the level of awareness. Because again, in many ways, we're lagging behind. Like if you look at who are the key players or the key stakeholders in the AI ecosystem right now, it still feels very centered on academia, legal, and tech. We haven't really broken the barrier into the creative industry in as much as we have in other parts of the world, right? It's why we're having so much discourse around licensing and copyright in other parts of the world, because they're seeing the direct impact of that, but locally, not so much. So it feels like we need to do a little bit more to engage with the creative industry.
I will say, creatives I've encountered in different parts of the world, they tend to experiment with AI quietly, has been my experience. Not necessarily everybody, but because at AJL, we actually launched a campaign called the 4 C's of creative rights, right? So I think everyone can agree on compensation. Pay me if you're going to use my work. Consent, ask me. Come on now, let's get on that noodle piece. And then there are also other parts, I think, credit. So much of what awes people about generative AI is because it learned patterns that awed us, right? I'm like, you're in awe of ourselves. Okay. But then the part that is more in the shadows is this control piece when it comes to the 4th C, which is maybe I want to create my own data set, right? And use that in a creative manner. And that's okay. But I'm not saying I now consent to some other tech company taking that and not compensating me. And so what I've seen now is people experimenting with creative AI tools, but quietly. And I think there's actually an opportunity to think about what would an ethical AI pipeline look like, such that you are developing tools that aren't just like we've had blood diamonds. We now have blood AI, right? And you don't want to necessarily be the person using that type of tool. So I think there's an opportunity to develop something else, right?
I mean, and also even from a policy perspective, I know we are running out of time, but you look at what global platforms that creatives are using and how they are affecting us. For example, recently one of our members, Dana Seda, was indicating how Spotify is saying they're going to basically take all the rights of anybody who has uploaded their content on Spotify, and they can reuse it, repurpose it, remix it without your consent, right? And they can use AI tools to basically voice your music in their platform. So there are some legal challenges that we're seeing. I think WeTransfer also said anything that you've kind of transferred using their platform.
They tried, and then they got some pushback.
They got some pushback. So there's already, within the creative space, there's already lots and lots of harms. And I like the way you summarize it in terms of the 4 C's. There's lots of harms, but the reason we are seeing, because we have Edwin, who's like our lead of AI work at the lab, and we are seeing, like, yes, there's lots of people who are testing it. There's also people who are kind of fiddling with it and trying to see what they're doing, what it could how it could benefit them. But there's a significant lack of awareness on what it could do for them, or what it, either good or bad. And this is when I shout out ourselves. So, like, we're trying to have those kind of literacy sessions within the space where I just say, get to know all these tools, get to utilize them, look at the harm. Let's talk about the harm and see what we can do. And talking to other bigger artists who are doing and using AI. Because in other parts, let me just give a quick example of some artists in Europe. I think Taylor Swift is one from the US also, who have now started taking this approach of actually not allowing you with phones in their concert, or allowing you with phones in even some clubs. I think in Portugal, you cannot go in with your phone, because what we tend to do when you go to these concerts is to record, right? But as you're recording, you're collecting all this data that then, if you have your Amazon, I don't know, I'm just saying, like, if you have another platform that can utilize that data that you have on your phone to basically profile me as a reveler who's just having fun and getting a little bit too drunk, but somebody has taken a picture of me without my consent, and now it's being used against me. So they look at it also from that part where AI is now getting into entertainment, and how is it affecting entertainment.
All right.
Now generative AI can create you doing what you never actually did at the club and post.
I mean, bringing it closer home, there's a deep fake video of John Alanamu doing rounds that is really scary. How real, like, if you're someone who doesn't know how he looks like now, like, you really would have thought that was him speaking. But anyway, so I'm gonna switch things up a little bit, because we could keep talking for hours on end, and we want to make sure that we include our audience. So yeah, we want to open up the floor to questions. I do have a few final questions for you all at some point, but yeah, is there any of you who has a question or a comment that they would like to share, either from go ahead. I need help taking the mic.
They have one here.
Okay, good. Fantastic. Right. Please tell us your name and then ask your question.
Hi, I'm Susan. Thank you so much for the panel. It was very interesting. My question is first to Dr. Melissa and then to all of you, including you, Angie. So one of the things, there was the conference that Strathmore had around the state of AI in Africa. And I think for me, your call to action, or one of your call to actions, was to challenge linguistic imperialism. And it's amazing, but it's broad. So when you look at, even moving away from policy and governance, when you look at how language data is being extracted in Africa, in Kenya, we're having cases where, like, AI detection software is flagging Kenyan writers because it was trained here. So how can we as Kenyans, as Africans, begin to tackle this conversation around linguistic imperialism, or even understanding the value that we have as humans and what we contribute or refuse to contribute to AI? And then my question to everyone is, what is a practical way that each of us in this room can start to actively engage with this conversation?
Maybe what we'll do is we'll take 2 more questions from the audience, and then we can try and answer them all. All right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Robin. I'm founder of a startup called Fobic. So my question probably can be broken down into 3. The first part is just, Maurice has been speaking about African innovators and how he's not necessarily seeing that literally translating into their work. So what I would like you to sort of highlight would be, what kind of an approach would you, in a sense, advise in terms of how we could come into the space, and it being not necessarily just reactive to the trends, but visionary in its own right? For Dr. Melissa, I think you've been passionate about both data and sovereignty around it. So our governments are rolling out both the biometric IDs, digital systems, and all that. And as an innovator in AI and a product builder, I would be very keen if you could share from your research, from your work with CIPIT, both principles and safeguards that we could embed this early, just to make sure that our tools don't necessarily just reproduce harm, even if it's an intention, but also we can be able to maneuver that balance between innovation, inclusion, and better protection. And I think for our start today, Dr. Joy, I think in your work you've spoken about coded gaze. I'm curious. I think now that you have the global, I think I would say approach since your work blasted. I think it's what would like an African gaze in AI look like if we designed from our own cultural, linguistic, and historical perspectives.
All right, because those were two very lengthy questions. I've seen your hand, so we'll come to you all next. I just want to give them a chance to answer them. So the first one was Melissa around language imperialism, and then for the rest of us was how we, what the practical call to action would be for everybody in the room. And then, let's start with that, and then we'll go into the second question.
Okay. Hi, Sandra. Nice to see you again. I'm meeting Sandra everywhere. So including the Gendering AI conference. So that was an awesome conference. Okay. I remember when I was talking about language, I said that I definitely understand that African languages are low resourced in terms of the AI ecosystem. And yes, we need to move them from low resource to high resource. But we need to know why. Why are we doing that? We should not just be collecting data for the sake of collecting data, because I feel like that's what's happening with the African data collectors. And maybe it's not for the sake. Let me be real. Many of the people who are collecting data is because they need money. So they collect the funding and then they collect the data. And they're collecting thousands of hours of data. If you talk to Professor Vukosi, he'll tell you that even the quality of the data collected is not good enough. So some of them are going back to clean up the quality. But what I like about that analysis is that he's thinking, now that the language data has been collected, what are we going to use it for? If you're collecting it so that you can put it out there as an open data set, then you are essentially providing material for others to utilize. And they don't understand your context. They're not really thinking about your interests. Their algorithms are not based on what we need our language to do. Even the way language moves in Africa is different. It's not the same subject, verb, object structure of the English language. Okay, so we need local context infused. I want to be clear that I do want us to collect language data, but we need to really think about why we're collecting and have use cases for it. I think government would be a wonderful person to implement language data for accessibility to services, right? Especially for me, the first thing I thought about when I was first starting out this work of understanding this language data that's being collected, I thought, brilliant. Now it makes sense why Kenya is moving all its services digital online. Yeah, it makes sense that now we'll have it accessible in these languages. eCitizen is accessible in how many languages? 2. English and Kiswahili. Also, Kiswahili is collected right now that I know of in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda. Have you had the Kiswahili that's spoken in Rwanda? And the Kiswahili that's spoken in Tanzania? It's different, but you release all these data sets as Kiswahili. And then other people are going to use that Kiswahili to make products, to sell them back to you, and they will not work. So we need to own the whole process. We need to own the data. We need to own the process. When I tell that to innovators, they tell me, so how are we going to do that? They're like, how are we going to do that? And I said, collective action. That's how we ended up creating Noodle. And then now it's pushing people to actually use Noodle. Your funder will not want you to use Noodle. the main difference between Noodle and other open data licenses is that it puts the community at the center of the process. You have to ask that language community. And yes, there's also a data community because they do the hard work of putting the language data into machine-readable format, cleaning, sorting, etc. So there are two communities that are there. You need to ask them, we've collected this language data. What do you want in return? And it's not necessarily monetary. That's what I learned from the Buolamwini community. Because if it's money, divide money by X number of people who have contributed 5,000 hours. It doesn't make sense. They have other, they call them sustainable benefits that they want for their community. So it needs collective action. Right now, there's a lot of resistance for Noodle, and I expected it because people are still learning to value the language. And language also carries culture. For us, our language is not just, how we communicate, but it carries culture with it. There are certain sacred things that are embodied in certain phrases and words. There are even certain places you could not collect a particular dialect or a particular use case of language. You could not collect it because it's meant for a subset. So we need to understand that and then make that show up in our in the tech that we are innovating and we are using. So I'm hoping that is answering the question. My call to action, also from Sandra, I think I would say be more present. Don't just jump on the bandwagon of using the latest tech, having the latest tech. Be present. And what do I mean? Understand why you're using the tool and what this tool is doing with the data that you're giving it. And also understand, how is it affecting you as an individual? It can affect you cognitively if it's making you, steer towards thinking certain knowledge production is better than others. If it's taking you away from the natural environment, I think be more present in understanding. Even as we're having this conversation of AI, for me, AI is a tool. It's not a whole, I don't know, it's not a thing that's, taking up all this space that we're trying to give it. It's a tool that you should implement in your normal life, but it should not take over everything. So just be more present.
Maurice?
I'll start with the call to action. For me, I think the reason why some of these movements or things are more successful is if everybody plays their part. And I'll kind of try and juxtapose this scenario with what we saw with the Gen Z movement that we've talked about right now a little bit. It's because most people are saying, I know more about this constitution. I'm going to translate it from my grandmother in the language that I can understand. Now, you, Sandra, Maurice, Angela, Dr. Joy, and everyone who's here know better about AI, know more about AI. What are we going to do about it, right? For me, I think it's more about how do we break that? How do we go in those spaces where typically we're not accessible? Because the language that we're using here, the location we are at is already set in a situation where we exclude a large number of Kenyans who should be having access, or we need them to have access to the knowledge that we have, but also to how it affects their day to day. Because even as we talk about biases and the idea that we give, if I'm talking to my grandmother back in Homa Bay, she doesn't care about her face being taken a picture. For her, she's like, "Ni picture, I like it. Go ahead, right?" But if I break it down to how it could potentially affect her day to day, like you could not be able to access healthcare because of this, you could not be able to access this, then they start understanding that this thing is really, it's close home. But if you talk with very, abstract and very high level language, then we're excluding a huge subset of the community. So I think it's up to us to break down that knowledge. There's a question that you had about the African innovator. And for me, I think it was a lack of imagination that we had as innovators to copy-paste Silicon Valley to Kenya, move fast and break stuff, right? And we do need to figure out. And I know African innovators also do not have the luxury that most Western innovators have. Even access to a credit card. You don't. We only have access to rich uncles who, unfortunately,
Do we though?
if you're lucky, right? And even if you do, then they'll invest their money in land or a strip mall around. They'll not invest in your tech platform, which utilizes AI. I think for us, if we could take a more... Actually, I do have a question, and I'm going to do something that panelists do globally.
Notice I'll start finding you.
Okay, I'm sorry. So you see, when you go to a panel, you're asked a question, then you throw back a question. So my question that I have, that I'm throwing back to you guys, is what is inclusivity and what is culture? I think we have talked about it as if it's universal. We understand it. But we've seen these words also being weaponized by some people. That's uncultural. So we exclude a certain subset of the community because it's uncultural. Because, so also just questioning what our common understanding of what culture and inclusivity is. Because for some people, inclusivity means, I don't know, climate change stuff. For some people, it's people with disability or differently able, right? So what is inclusivity? For some people, it's social economic classes. For some people, it's race, gender, and all that. So I think it's more about, again, having more diverse people within our test as we are building. That will allow us to be a bit more inclusive and culturally nuanced. That's it.
Thank you. So let's finish this first one, and then we'll answer the second question. And then what I will ask for, because I'm very cognizant of your time, for the next round of questions, let's make them brief, and then for us, let's also make our responses brief. Thank you, Joy.
All right, I'll keep it brief. We have 3 actions. I need you to show up, speak up, stand up. Show up, right? When we have gatherings, make sure you're present, bring a friend. Speaking up, this whole film, Coded Bias, when I had that experience of literally putting on a white mask as a student, I had a choice. I could have chosen silence, right? And the Algorithmic Justice League wouldn't exist, and Masking AI, all that has formed from that. And I think of all the tools that are available, the voice still remains the most powerful tool. Of course, I'm biased as a poet, self-reflecting on my biases, right? But I think we sometimes underestimate the power of our stories. And so because a young grad student spoke up about an art project not working on her face, that's where we come here. And then standing up is about taking the action. And sometimes you're standing alone, right? Or sometimes people fall off the wayside, like the common cause only bonds you for a little bit. And so I think you have to be okay standing alone, knowing that your tribe will find you.
I will piggyback off that and say, do it afraid, do it anyway. And then secondly, follow the irrational path. And what do I mean by that? So right now, it's with the discourse with AI, it's we've been labeled consumers. It's like everything has to come from the West, and then we consume, and then we're constantly trying to figure out how we fit into that, break that. What does it look like for us to build truly African solutions, right? And I know that there's a bunch of roadblocks. We don't have access to compute, talent, all of that. But what are the interesting ways that we can try and break through that? So question everything and do it afraid. Right. Second question. You all remember, I saw you taking notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you answered it. Okay,
Oh,
so you need to
actually,
answer this. Okay.
Let me defend him. He answered.
Okay.
So the second question on biometrics, ID systems, and principles that we could implement. I love this question because I can tell a story around this question.
Please don't tell the story. We don't have time.
Brief. I'm gonna be big. Everybody remembers WorldCoin, right? Do you remember the WorldCoin fiasco? See what I'm gonna do for the camera. Yes, thank you.
Scanning.
So, WorldCoin was a wonderful use case for us because we tested what would we do when this was happening here. And you saw what happened. The ODPC checked in and said, hey, halted the processes. When she made the determination that she canceled the license for these people who inundated that office with documents so that they couldn't really know. Okay, allegedly, there was no clear understanding of what it is that they were going to collect. And even her process of cancelling the license went all the way to Parliament, right? And we had hearings, we had parliamentary hearings where we could all participate and know what the discussions were. We have a process that can work. When people's personal data, identifiable data, is taken in a way that we doubt the consent, because the issue of consent there was doubted because there was money or some form of money that was involved, right? And the demographic that were showing up to have their irises scanned, right, were people who can we really say that they have free will or to make that. So we do have a wonderful Data Protection Act. It's being reviewed. There are 23 statutes that are currently being reviewed in terms of emerging technology. We actually are in the process of a national data governance policy being drafted. And it's not a data policy, it's a data governance policy. I think the addition of the word governance means a lot. Okay, what does that mean for you? What principles can you utilize? Number one, if you go read the act, it will tell you. I'm trying to be short because Angie's looking at me. But number two, ask yourself, do you need all the data? That's data minimization, right? Do you need all the data? Have you anonymized that data? And you must anonymize for real. This is me trying to say the Kiswahili word of anonymize ya ukweli, si ile ingine, right? And I'm saying for real for Joy's.
For real.
I got the tone. I was like, okay, you like really do.
Also, where are you storing? Where are you storing that data? Because I can tell you for free, when you think that you're storing it in a secure facility, where are you sure? Cloud actually is not really cloud. It's a data center somewhere else. What laws apply? And I know you're going to start telling me, Melissa, but now you're making me become a lawyer. No, if you're going to peddle in the area of personal identifiable information that is classified as sensitive personal data, you have the obligation as the innovator to know where that data is going and to get informed consent from the people who you're getting that data from. Not just consent, informed, meaning you have to explain to them. And yes, it's going to take time. And yes, it might be expensive. Thank you.
Preach.
So I believe there was a question about the coded gaze, which builds on concepts like the male gaze or the white gaze, and it's very much around who has power to shape preferences, priorities, and even embed prejudices. And so when it would come to what would an African gaze look like, I don't think it's for one individual to decide. I think that's actually what makes it exciting, right? What does this mosaic look like? So the way I see the world and the way you see the world, I'm glad we don't all see it the same way. The question for me is, how do we bring a spotlight that goes away from a universalizing gaze? Because that's generally what's happening when you have big tech platforms. You have the universal for everyone, but who is that everyone? It often doesn't include the ones like us in some way. And so that's more so what I would be thinking about, right? How do we have the space to enable many people to make their visions a reality?
We'll take the two. How many more questions did we have? Wow. I see so many hands up. Okay, let's do this. We will take. I
More
know,
questions,
clearly.
yeah. But
So
they can only be one question, like not 5-part.
Yes, of course. Like this, make it one question. We're going to take 3, and then what I'm going to ask is, because we're going to be here for a few minutes after, let's have the conversation unofficially, just so that we can leave space for those who do need to go. I'm looking at you, Peter. But anyway, all right. You have the mic. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. If I shiver a bit, it's because of the cold. I've been trying to stay warm here.
Okay.
But hi, I'm Gloria, and I had actually met you during the Oxford edition of this, and I was like excited when Jaleesa told me that you're coming to Nairobi. I was like, oh, I'll be there by then.
Yeah, front row, you made it. Keep for coming.
Even in Oxford, I was in front row. So
Front row twice.
anywho, yeah, so I'm also a creative. I do football or women's sports content creating, and I am in the sports tech / creative computing side of stuff. So when you talked about the storytelling and the artist side of changing the narrative, I felt like you're literally preaching to me, which is crazy. But anywho, my question is actually from, it was built up from what was all said from like Maurice, sorry, I'm really bad at names. He talked about Spotify taking the rights of the content that's uploaded. The same thing happens to CapCut with content creating. Like, it's a global thing that's a big issue. And I was shocked that you also didn't mention Tony Ndungo. He creates content online on AI and all of that. Like, he's a tech guy for Kenya. Anywho, my question is, how long do you think it will take for this African mosaic? Sorry, I'm really nervous.
Yes.
To be formed within AI sovereignty, because I honestly believe that we need to be innovating more rather than just copy pasting, trying to make Silicon Valley come into Nairobi being the Silicon Savannah. And how would it be designed? Because I'm from Mombasa, and comparing the tech space there and here, it's completely different. Like, I literally come to Nairobi for events like this, including this, and it's crazy how I am passionate, but my location affects me, even though it's the same country. Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll take the other two. Wait, okay. That and then one there. We'll have one more at the back. I see you all. I will not leave you hanging. We'll make sure the mic comes to you. So we'll have you and then someone at the back. Go ahead.
I promise I'll be super quick. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yusra, and I work in the humanitarian and development space. And I don't want to take my question too far away from the creative space, but even in the sector that I work in now, AI is the name of the game. There's the buzz around it. And a lot of times it's to the detriment of the people that we're there to serve. The amount of data mining that is happening to an extent where even if they give informed consent, well, either you give the consent or you don't receive the service. So how can we begin to address that in a system or a structure where like 90% of our funding is coming from global North governments that are actually trying to mine that data?
It's a really important question. Thank you. We'll give it to the... Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. It's amazing to see you here. You were in Kigali in April. You promised to come to Nairobi. It's great to see you here.
Keeping my promises.
Fantastic. There's actually a crowd here from MIT to receive you, and we hope we'll get a photo together.
Of course.
And so I want to take you back to MIT, and I want to ask one question. What next? Just one question. What next? And to give it context, you have Ushahidi represented on the stage with you. You have Baraza Media Lab on the stage with you. You have Melissa from CIPIT. We both work at Strathmore. There's a big Strathmore crowd in the room. There are amazing conversations in Kigali. You're having an amazing conversation today on the backdrop of a big announcement by the MIT president or MIT's positioning on all the issues happening in the US. And at the same time, earlier this week, the MIT Industrial Liaison Program had an event in London talking about the place of AI and corporates. And it's refreshing to have this conversation against the backdrop of that conversation because the themes here were not tackled there. What next? It's great to have you in Nairobi. We want you to keep coming back to Nairobi. What next? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Could we take the mic all the way to the back? Thank you. And then for anyone else who has any questions, just hold on to it. We'll make sure that you have some time to talk to the panelists after we're done.
You can hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been a really illuminating panel or discussion, conversation to listen to. So, 5th edition, 1st edition, and where we're coming from too is we're coming from situations where we talk about regulatory work that needs to get done and some of the biases we see in algorithms and codes, right? Now, 5 years later, we're seeing this consolidation, basically, of the big tech around AI. In fact, even the U.S. federal government backing non-regulation of AI as Valencia using it for warfare, right? And then even when you look at use cases, from Melissa's earlier, when fintech, frontier countries or frontier territories like kind of Africa, where you have shortages of physicians and healthcare providers, use cases now coming up around use of healthcare, given its biases and all the harm that it can cause as frontline healthcare providers in some cases, right? In this case. So I think the entire system as well also is also one where we're working in, when you look at the African context, is one where also infrastructure biases exist, right? So GPUs, compute capacity, talent, are also kind of lagging in that context. So I wonder, the question probably for me is, what's the work? Is work debiasing the algorithms, or is work actually debiasing power?
Wow. Okay. Clearly. So we had the one on the African
We
mosaic.
want local voices.
Well, all right. So we have the question on the African mosaic. We have the one on impact in the humanitarian sector. We have what's next. And then are we debiasing algorithms or debiasing power?
Mm.
What a mic drop.
Do you want to break them up? I'll take what's next because that was clearly for me as we sort out which other ones. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. No.
Sorry, go ahead, Joy.
Okay.
Yes.
I think it's a good question, but something I've been learning. I was talking to a friend who recently bought land in Kenya. He's Kenyan, to start a vineyard. And he was talking about how if you're in Kenya, because of the temperature, you can actually harvest twice. But if you harvest twice, the grapes won't last as long. And I've been applying that to my own life. So between unmasking AI, coded bias, starting the Algorithmic Justice League, all of those things, I've been really fortunate that there has been harvest, right? And there's always time for planting as well. So I'm intentional, right, in saying, what does it look like to plant for the next generation as well? I mean, I still got some life. But I'm not out of the game, but that's something I've been thinking more about, how to use the attention and the platform really to amplify so much great work that's happening beyond anything I've done or the Algorithmic Justice League could do alone.
Thank you.
You had time. I was stalling.
I'll start with the last question. In my own perspective, I think it could be both. It could be debiasing the algorithms as well as the power. Because I think the algorithms are already out there. They're doing what they're doing, right? So we still have to have some work in terms of advocating for some openness in that space, while also deconstructing and debiasing powers that are there who are building it. And I'm assuming power, you mean like I would like to understand more what you meant by the word power. Sorry, my alarm for food.
Competing.
You didn't give it to Lillian?
The interesting thing about the humanitarian space, especially in Kenya, it's the space that has way more data than even our governments. If you want any data around anything in Kenya, you first of all go to the World Bank, UN pages. That's where you get the recent data. And sometimes when the data that the government has is from those organizations. So it shows you how that data is super useful, and how it's collected also is useful, is equally important. I'll give an example of when USAID folded, it literally folded with the entire Kenyan healthcare system data. I don't know if you are, it's public information.
Yep.
It followed with our entire healthcare system, our data. So we have no clue. I mean, I'm not in government, but they don't have lots of clue right now about how, our healthcare system is working. I'll give an example that is live to us, just as a sequel. So we work in Kisumu. The first time we go in Kisumu, I think, remind me, Edwin, I think it was like late last year to do a workshop. We get about 200 people who show up, but maybe less. And mainly because most of the young people who are working in that space were in the healthcare space. which was significantly funded by the USAID, right? Now, USAID folds. We go back for an event and we get 800 young people who come up. And these are people who were saying, hey, we were working in the healthcare space, but since it's folded, now we're in the creative space. And, so what I'm trying to signify is that data sovereignty also plays a key role. So even as a humanitarian organization, I think I'll go back to what Dr. Joy was talking about in terms of the 4 Cs that is happening in the creative space. So even as you're collecting it, how are you crediting them? How are you compensating them? How are you, all the 4 Cs that you talked about could be very important for you to also implement in the humanitarian space as you're collecting that data. Because that data is not just numbers, it's lives. Because in Kisumu right now, they did a recent analysis, I think by, is it JPEG or something, which shows that actually HIV AIDS has gone up by 60%. 60% since USAID. And that's just, when you say it like that, and the people who are collecting that data on the ground, it seems like, we're just reporting 60%. But these are lives that we're talking about, or people who are dead, or are going, or are ill, So for me, I think if I was to talk about anything, is to give agency to the guys you're collecting data from by doing the 4 Cs.
Right. Melissa, last one before I...
Okay. I think the funding question is connected to the power question. So I think if I tackle those two, that probably will be good. Maurice has said a lot of things. I want to say that if you're talking about the same health database, healthcare providers could not access that database even when USAID was funding. If we're talking about the same one, because I was having a conversation with people who work in open data, and they said they were providing live data to this database, right? Because it was from literally county clinics, hospitals. But the county clinician could not then go and check the data and access. And this is what I'm saying is also happening with language data. You're going to give away the language data, you will be charged probably $20 per month to access.
Sewa?
Wow. So okay, $200 per month to access it. The same thing might also happen to your judicial cases. In order for you to access judicial cases, you might end up paying for it because of who is collecting. And we're getting back to the power question. I think you have to deconstruct the power in order to deconstruct the bias also. And you've just demonstrated to us that we have bias ourselves, right? Because we are here in Nairobi, we should have been hosted in Mombasa.
Maurice may have come.
I'm sure the less age less COVID 24 haven't seen. I feel
True.
Yeah.
So there we have it, right? It shows up in different ways, but essentially there's power operating in terms of urban. Those of us who are in this urban area are dominating the space and the conversation and are speaking on behalf of you, including some of us who are here, maybe who understand Bill Clinton. I'm trying to talk about age, we're talking about age. Are speaking for the youth, right? I noticed there was silence. I realized that really you guys don't understand what I say. Maybe Martin is the only one who got that Bill Clinton reference. So I think, yes, we have to deconstruct the power. How do we do it? We can't say we are going to run away from the funding. That is a conversation I've had with innovators and researchers. Even myself, I'm funded. I am definitely funded to do the research that I do, but I'm also selective about who funds me to do the research so that I can ensure that I have control over the research that I'm doing, not the person who is funding me. That I can sit on a stage like this and talk about African AI and not worry about my research funding being pulled. The people who might not have that privilege are the techies who research in that space and are funded by big tech. And what are they currently doing? They're trying to form those collectives so that they can have collective action. A Lacuna Fund, which unfortunately has gone under, is an example, right? Lacuna Fund is where we ended up having the first Africa AI conference because the researchers there came up together and told their funders we need to have a conference. And in that conference, they started asking questions about ownership of data. But with USAID going down, with CEDA sort of putting back the funding, Lacuna Fund is down. But there's Masahane Language Hub that has come up. And Masahane Language Hub is actually directed by the trustees of Masahane. And if you didn't know, Masahane was registered in Kenya. I'm saying was registered, even though it's currently, legally the registration happened back then. But okay, so it is still functional. Its registration is a Kenyan registration. So yes, we need to do both of these things together. So as we are deconstructing the power, we are then ensuring that we're deconstructing biases, but we also need to be cognizant of the biases that we also have.
Thank you.
And to that point, oftentimes, especially since I'm known for AI bias work, people come up to me like, we're going to debias the systems. Said, did we get rid of the humans? Because as long as we have the humans, there will be a perspective, there will be values, right? And so following on to what you're talking about with deconstructing, I think more about decoding bias and also decoding power and understanding the different roles we can all play and that we don't only have to change one point in the system. So I think how we end up not having our collective action is being siloed. The techies don't talk to the artists, or the people who live in this location don't go here. This is part of why I was so excited to do the world tour. All right, this conversation is so far beyond MIT or the United States and so forth, and so I do think at the end of the day, it is this decoding of power and of bias. So we bias it towards the priorities we want, right? We vote for the power structures we want to see.
Now, in less than 30 seconds, just parting shot from all of you, what does an inclusive and equitable AI future look like to you? 30 seconds or less.
Sorry, I was buying time with the. What does the future of an inclusive and
What does an inclusive and equitable AI future look like? AI-driven future look like?
I don't have an answer.
Why?
I mean, COVID told me not to think that much because, sorry, COVID came and disrupted everything. But if I was just to think about it, it's more about. I'll still go back to what we view as inclusive, but I do see a situation where, with more kind of this collective action, evangelizing about the roles of AI, I see it more brighter in terms of like there'll be more voices that were often left on the periphery who will be more central to these conversations. Where it will no longer be a situation where you're building something and claim ignorance that I don't know. Right now, I think there's enough data, enough content, enough narrative, enough people who have been talking about the biases that are going on. There's a documentary and a film about it. So I do not see a situation where we'll be talking about this we should be talking about this as a situation where we're saying that AI is inherently biased, but it will be less biased because we are human beings. Yeah.
Thank you, Maurice. Melissa?
Where? I think it would be where we have more control. And when I say we, I'm not saying a privileged class. I mean, everybody has more control and access. There's more transparency and accountability so that we are not just providing, we are utilizing the tools in ways that solve our unique problems. I think if you do that, then you would have hit some of those markers for equitable, responsible, just the future, right? The future bit is a bit tricky for me. I'm just in a place of despair currently. But I have hope that if we keep fighting for control, then it will make sense in our context.
Keep the hope alive.
Got it.
Dr. Joy.
I'm going to use an older technology the book, handwritten word by word, and do some time traveling to something I wrote on this. The rising frontier in the fight for civil rights and human rights will require algorithmic justice, which for me ultimately means the people have a voice and a choice in determining and shaping the algorithmic decisions that shape their lives. That when harms are perpetuated by AI systems, there's accountability in the form of redress to correct the harms inflicted. That we do not settle on notions of fairness that do not take historical and social factors into account. That the creators of AI reflect their societies. That data does not destine you to unjust discrimination. That you are not judged by the contents of your data profiles you may never see. That we value people over metrics. That your hue is not a cue to dismiss your humanity. That AI is for the people and by the people, not just the privileged few.
Well done. Thank you so much. That beautifully said. And thank you all so much for what has been an incredibly thoughtful and inspiring conversation. I'm really sorry we went over time, but I think that was necessary. I really did enjoy that. Thank you so very much.
And hand to Angie for wonderful moderation, assisted by Maurice. Uninvited, but all good.
Stolen by Maurice. Anyway.